Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 39 for March 3rd, 2017. Hey everybody, Daniel Rubino here, joined with Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast. And this week we got a few things on tap, including, yes, more insider builds. We just had an update today, just a little while before we went live with this podcast, as well as Windows 10 Cloud, which Zach is going to tell us about. We learned a lot more about that, and he actually got to demo it for others. We'll talk about that new HP phone, what looks to be a follow-up to the Elite X3, and our speculation about what that is. And we'll also talk a little bit about mixed reality and the Xbox. And finally, if we have time, I'll fit in some stuff about the new Razer Blade Kaby Lake, which by the time this podcast goes live on the site, I'll have posted my follow-up review with that, comparing it to the previous version. Turns out Kaby Lake is a lot better than I anticipated. And also talk a little bit about that Lenovo Idea Center, which is a really cool all-in-one VR-ready PC. Zach, how are you doing today?
I'm not so bad. I'm just swimming in builds because we had a couple Windows Insider releases this week. We had build 15046 for desktop, and then we had 15048 for desktop and 15047 for mobile. Now, there's not really any new changes in these builds, of course, since we are so close to RTM, but lots and lots of fixes and under the hood improvements, which is very nice to see. And what I was surprised to see is that the mobile build released this week has only one known issue, and it's to do with language packs installing. So technically, if you're not somebody who uses multiple languages on your phone and doesn't have to install packs all the time, this build has technically no issues. Whether that remains true, I don't know. So far, the build seems to be working absolutely fine for me. Dan, I don't, any issues for you so far on the mobile build?
I'm running, so mobile build, I just did a fresh install, and as someone brought up to me, like, yeah, I guess you can only do this on the Elite X3. The Elite X3, I had to roll back because it can't get firmware on fast ring.
Right.
So I had to use the Windows Device Recovery tool to get the new firmware, but I can go right from like, for some reason, the HP device it has that bug with the firmware, but it gets the latest build for production when you do a rollback, which is convenient. And then you can go right to the latest fast ring instantly. So I went right to today's fast ring build. And so far, obviously, it feels fantastic. I still really recommend doing that once in a while. If like you're having, I see some people like tell me like, either their 950 or the Alcatel Idol, they're like, oh, fast ring is buggy. It's just, I have so many issues. Like if you're that person, and you're just like having tons of issues and please reset your phone. I know you shouldn't have to do that. And that's another topic that we can talk about in a couple of weeks. But trust me, like, roll it back, go right to the new fast ring, and then try it out. And I guarantee your experience will be a lot better. I don't know why that is. Maybe, and I don't know if that's a side effect of the testing. You know, obviously, for consumers, they're just going to go right from these iterative production builds to the latest release, and they shouldn't have these problems. But yeah, so far it seems fine on my Elite X3. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm probably going to put my SIM into it because I have two Elite X3, so I'm using the production, which is also running very well. I guess we should also mention, we didn't put that in there. The Elite X3 did get another firmware update this week.
Yes, it did, and this one addressed performance issues, which is something that I was hoping they'd address sooner rather than later. I've pointed it out before, there was an issue with the Elite X3 up until this firmware, as far as I can tell, that when opening and closing an app, the animation was sort of lag or pause midway. So you'd open the app, the animation would start, then the screen would go black before the splash screen of the app would begin to load. And this wasn't the case on devices like the Lumia 950 or any other Lumia device or Windows Phone device. So if you compared the Elite X3 side by side with literally any other Windows Phone, more often than not, the other Windows Phone was able to keep up with the Elite X3 based on this animation lag alone. From my testing, it appears to be gone, which is very good. So it feels a lot more snappier now.
I know this bothered you a lot, too. This is one thing you always talked about with me.
Because obviously the Elite X3 has an 820, a Snapdragon 820, and I thought this has to be the fastest phone, and then it just wasn't because of the stupid animation lag. But now it's fixed and therefore feels much faster, which is fantastic.
He also addressed some low light camera issues regarding the flash, which is kind of nice, and some memory optimization, I think, for multitasking. Seem like subtle improvements. I can't say it's a night and day difference for me, but I do agree with the animations. It does seem smoother. Elite X3 is still, we talk about that. We're talking this with Jez right now because Jez is on the fence about buying the HP Elite X3. And, it is, if you're just hooked on Windows 10 Mobile, you're part of that crowd. that is the phone going forward, at least until later this year. So, but you got to think about where you're spending your money, obviously. But it's still my only issue with it. It's still a large phone, and that's my only thing. And obviously the camera is not as good as the 950. I think the 950 and the XL's camera is still amazing, and with the latest builds on fast ring, it feels really good to me as well. As far as the PC version for fast ring, so I'm running that on my Surface Book, and I got to tell you, that is coming along really nicely. I've had no issues with Surface Book and the latest fast ring releases, at least the last two of them. Windows Hello is just, it's so fast right now. It makes me wonder why, like, if you're running their the lock paper, what they recommended, where I forgot what they call it, the smart lock paper thing, where it recommends, you can vote on whether you like that image, which is a really cool feature, and that's been there for a while. But now it's so fast with Windows Hello, you don't get a chance to go and like vote on things or even read those little blurbs and stuff. So it's just like it's super fast, but it's been a really good experience. It really, they did a lot of improvements, and we'll talk about this at some point, regarding Seashell and what they're doing with everything, but the way they've changed how the graphics handle is just a lot faster. It's a lot smoother. It feels like a different OS compared to the previous one. So I'm pretty happy with it. I think we're getting to the point where we can almost recommend putting this on the main machine, but
yeah, I mean, we are about a couple weeks away, maybe even less, from Microsoft actually sitting down and signing off a build for the final release of the Creators Update that will go out to the public. We're not there just yet, as I said, a couple weeks, but an interesting fact. The last two Insider releases were actually rolled out as if they were production builds. Microsoft had compiled them as production builds. They had no time bomb, and as you would have noticed, no watermark either. However, today's release brings that all back. So not entirely sure what that means, if it means anything. Maybe there was just an error in the compiling of the build. Regardless, we're very close to RTM at this point, and we should be seeing a final build very soon, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm tempted to put it on the Surface Studio. I'm really curious about how that handles. I don't know. We'll see.
I've installed it on my basic. I'm running on all of my devices now. Usually, I used to with Threshold 1. I have ran all the Insider builds on all of my machines anyway, regardless of how buggy they were. But then once the Threshold 1 hit RTM, I was always on the release preview up until usually a few weeks before RTM sign off, and that's been the same case here with Redstone 2. The builds are basically all done. There's a few bugs left, none of them that are affecting me. Mostly, apart from the Brio Logitech one, which me and Dan were speaking about before the show started. If you own a Brio Logitech, not many of you do, the camera seems to break. The driver just stops working if you upgrade from build to build, and there is a way to fix it. It's not difficult to fix, but it's just something worth noting. I am very excited for the Creators Update to be considered done. If you're running the leaked Windows Cloud build that came out however many weeks ago, Microsoft are now issuing insider builds for it, and they do install and work just fine. And I've been actually messing about with the cloud edition of Windows 10 as of recently, and I did a write-up today on giving a basic hands-on on what it is and what it isn't. So for those of you unaware, Windows 10 Cloud is a new edition of Windows 10 launching with the Creators Update, which isn't like your average edition of Windows 10. It's more aimed towards Chromebook devices, low-end devices, or premium devices, if it's also aimed at Chromebooks, that can't run apps from outside the Windows Store. So very similar to Windows RT in the sense that if you want an app, you have to open the Windows Store and download it through there. If you try to download the app through Edge or another browser, if you can get another browser installed, the app simply won't run. It will say, sorry, this app isn't from the Windows Store. Would you like to search the Windows Store for it? Now, some people aren't happy with this edition of Windows because I think they assume this edition of Windows will be rolling out as an update for everybody. That's not the case. This is a sort of standalone maintained version of edition of Windows that will be only available on preloaded onto devices, similar to how Windows 8.1 with Bing was. You couldn't buy Windows 8.1 with Bing on the internet or on a store shelf. That'll be the same with Windows 10 Cloud as well. It'll be for hardware makers to preload onto low-end devices to take on Chromebooks. So devices like
And to be clear, we want to actually stress this. I mean, we have seen internal documentation where they are absolutely aiming this thing at Chromebooks. Right. This isn't sort of like us speculating or guessing. This is 100% aimed at education and going after that Chromebook market, which the latest stats just came out. And I believe Chromebooks are now at around I think over 25% or getting higher in the US education segment. And what's really interesting is Windows is losing a little bit. I think they're at 22% now. But it's actually Apple that's getting their butt kicked. Everybody's giving up on the iPad as an education segment type computer because it's computer in quotes, of course. But still, Microsoft doesn't want to lose that market. There is this, idea here that if you raise children on Chromebooks, they're going to grow up in this Google environment, and that's what they're going to prefer as adults. There's this whole thing about what you're exposed to, and that's why I use PC. I've never been fundamentally against Apple. I just started with PC, so that's what I continue with. But we know 100% that Windows 10 Cloud is definitely geared towards the education segment. I would also say enterprise, of course, too, where they need it locked down in certain environments. And I think it's actually a super good move. It's as you're going to probably talk about, it's meant for low-end hardware, Intel Atoms and these kind of things where devices only cost a couple $100 and you can roll it out in mass.
Right. I mean, the perfect example of a device type that this version of Windows 10 will make sense on are HP's Stream line of devices. They are low-end devices, usually Intel Celeron with 32 gigabytes of storage and maybe 4 gigabytes of RAM. These are the kind of devices that Windows 10 Cloud is aimed at. And it makes sense. The name Cloud, although there aren't any additional cloud features over normal editions of Windows 10, it being called Windows 10 Cloud kind of makes sense on a Stream device because they are also designed to work with mostly cloud features. So when you set up a Windows 10 Cloud device, it will automatically hook up to your OneDrive. You're expected to be streaming music and video from the web or from Groove and whatnot, or Netflix, and it works pretty well. I installed it on my Surface 3 because that's kind of a device I would expect Windows Cloud to be running on, and I have had no issues with it because, I mean, on a Surface 3, on a low-end device, mid-range device like the Surface 3, I'm not going to be running Premiere Pro or Google Chrome on it. I'm running, lightweight apps. I'm running GroupMe. I'm running Skype Preview. I'm running Twitter Universal app. I'm running maybe Slack, which is probably the most complicated desktop app I will try to run on it. And it's all available in the Windows Store. And again, with Windows Cloud, you're not really expected to be needing these super complicated, very rare apps on the web. So
actually, let me ask you, how does it feel on the Surface 3 in compared to just Windows 10 before? Does it feel any different?
No, and that's, I guess, one of the selling points. Maybe not, I don't know. But Windows Cloud is identical to Windows 10 in every way, shape, and form, apart from the fact that you can't download apps from the web. It simply looks the same, acts the same. It has no limitations apart from the app
But it's
thing.
not any faster either?
No, it doesn't seem to be any faster at all. I don't think they've made any under-the-hood improvements to the Cloud edition to make it run faster. I mean, I don't see how they could, considering all the Win32 APIs are technically still there. Because you can run Win32 on Windows 10 Cloud. If it's in the store, it will run. It's not a UWP only thing. It's just a Windows Store thing. So any app in the Windows Store can run, whether it be a game, Win32, UWP, or something other.
Someone's Win 10 fan asks, I wonder if Microsoft would go the Google route with Windows 10 Cloud and require SSDs for fast performance. Yes, I actually believe they do. I don't know if they're going to require it, but it is highly recommended. We've seen some of these specs for the quote-unquote hero devices for this category. Now, when I say hero, I don't mean premium, super expensive. I mean the ideal device that's for low-range category. And yes, they do recommend, I believe, SSDs for performance there. They're actually benchmarking this against actual Chromebooks for boot on times and logons and all that kind of stuff. They want it to be exactly competitive with Chromebooks in terms of performance in every way. And yeah, SSD is the way to go there. I think also SSD, because if you're giving it to like school kids and everything like that, they're just more durable, where a hard drive is susceptible to drops. And so you kind of don't want that in a device that's going to be used for education.
Yeah, I mean, the Windows Cloud block itself, when using it, it's just a simple sort of, it says, oh, sorry, you can't run this app unless it's in the Windows Store. But some specific apps have their own special dialogues. Google Chrome is one of them. It will, when you try to launch the Google Chrome install, it will say, yeah, you cannot run this. And then below it will say, Microsoft Edge is the best. Use Microsoft Edge for blah, 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 blah. It basically kind of advertises a lot of things as well, it makes sense. This is a version of Windows 10 that will be sold to hardware makers for free. So there's kind of trades-offs. So Microsoft doesn't obviously get anything in return for hardware makers bundling this version of Windows onto their devices, whereas usually they have to pay a fee, I believe, right, Dan? if they want
Yeah,
to
right.
preload Windows 10 Home or Pro, and Hardware Maker will have to pay Microsoft for that license on that device. Makes sense. But
Yeah.
with Windows 10 Cloud, that is not the case. So Microsoft are expected to make it up with services such as Office 365 and OneDrive storage and whatever else they have. But because OEMs don't have to pay for the Windows license, they get less control over things. For example, the app block is one of them. The other one was, I can't remember what it was now. There's a few things in there that they simply cannot mess with, which would make sense. Similar to how Windows 8.1 with Bing, the deal was Windows 8.1 with Bing was free, but hardware makers weren't able to change the search provider. The user could change it once the device was set up, but the OEM provider was unable to do so. Just so little things like that with Windows Cloud. And all in all, I'm okay with it. I know there are a few people who are like, no, this is terrible.
I don't get that. I mean, I'm 100% behind this. I think it's a smart idea. They need something to compete with Chromebooks. And we've talked about this endlessly before. The selling point in Chromebooks is the security. The inability to run executable apps is a huge thing for device remote management. It's also cheaper. It's been faster. It's all that kind of stuff. And this directly, addresses that. So I don't get why consumers would care whether Microsoft does this or not. It doesn't affect them, but they need something for the education market. And like I said, this is more about getting, keeping kids in the Windows world, which is going to be the future. Don't forget, you got to get kids onto Windows 10 because that ties directly into what was Windows Holographic, which is now Windows Mixed Reality, which Nadella sees as really the future of their computing platform. So you can't lose them to the Google world and then try to get it back later. So I think this is a smart move. It does get confusing, if only because people who are following this are trying to keep track of SKUs and stuff. But as consumers and regular people, even the name Windows 10 Cloud, I'm not sure that's necessarily even going to be a public-facing thing. Kids are just going to get computers at school with Windows 10 on it, and that's going to be the end of the story. And that's all they're going to have to know about it.
It's pretty interesting. I've noticed that some of the dialogues on the Windows 10 Cloud SKU actually refer to it as Windows Cloud. The 10 number isn't there, but it's not everywhere. It's very inconsistent right now. In some areas it says Windows 10 Cloud, in other areas it will just say Windows Cloud. So I'm not sure what they're going to go for there. That
kind of makes sense because I've talked to Microsoft behind the scenes about this stuff before, going back when Windows 10 first came out, which is why I call it Windows 10, when in theory, this is the last version of Windows, Windows as a service. So why not just call it Windows? And it's actually a good reason, which is Windows is too generic of a name. So if you need help or you got to go search for something and you just type in Windows on the web, you're obviously going to get a lot of noise in your data collection there. So specifying it as Windows 10 narrows all sorts of things down for whether you're looking for apps, whether you're looking for support, whether you're looking for devices. If you just type in Windows, it's almost too broad. Windows Cloud kind of gets that back because you're putting cloud into it now. So as a Boolean type search, that obviously is going to limit what things come up. So that may be a reason why they're doing it. But ultimately, we know Windows 10 is just Windows going forward. It's just almost too generic of a name. So
it's also worth noting that the latest cloud builds have a new wallpaper. That
yes.
Slightly redesigned Terra wallpaper.
It looks nice.
It does look nice. It does look nice. I guess it looks like that this wallpaper will be specific for cloud, similar to how Windows 7 Starter had its sort of redesigned wallpaper compared to normal Windows 7. To differentiate it against from the other devices that can run Win32, I guess. Regardless, the wallpaper looks nice. It will be the new default wallpaper for cloud users. And another thing worth noting is that if you have a Windows 10 Cloud device and you buy one off the shelves, you can, if you really want to, upgrade that edition to Windows 10 Home or Pro, which will then enable you to run Win32 if you really need it. But I mean, I'm pretty sure if you're buying a Windows Cloud machine, the people who are selling it to you will obviously outline what it can and can't do, and you make that decision there. And then if you know you need a laptop that runs Win32, then I'm sure you'd go somewhere else anyway. So all in all, the Windows Cloud stuff, it's for security, for performance, and it keeps you locked to the Windows Store, which I think are all good things for the kind of device that Windows Cloud is aimed at. If this was being aimed at everything, every Windows device, then this would be a huge deal and a big problem, but that's not happening.
Right. Also, just to close out this part here, two questions. Well, not questions, but one observation. one, when are we going to start to see alternative browsers hit the store, and if that's
Right.
possible or not? At some point, Google's going to want to get Chrome into the Windows Store, I would think. Same thing with Opera and Firefox. I'm not sure. Centennial, it can do a lot. I'm not sure what the restrictions are, or if there's certain things you kind of can't do with browsers, but that's going to be interesting if and when that happens. I think it's going to benefit companies. Ironically, it could probably hurt Microsoft because people still switch browsers all the time. And in fact, if you're using Windows 10 and you try to switch browsers, like little pop-ups go like, "Are you sure?" It's like, it's just a lot better. We like it, and so that's something they have to weigh. But it's an interesting choice for both companies. And the other thing is, we should mention that we are expecting Microsoft to actually officially announce Windows Cloud sometime in early April. So that, of course, can shift as all dates do with Microsoft. But there should be an official sort of announcement, I imagine, on the Windows blog that will come out. It won't be some obviously huge press event. This is just going to be like, hey, we have this other version for education business that's coming out there, and here's what it is and stuff. So by the time you read that, none of you will be surprised, but I do expect some sort of like official, thing about this coming out with in the next few weeks.
And a lot of people have been assuming as well that this is the edition of Windows that will end up on phones. I
Right.
don't believe so. This is definitely, a Chromebook thing. Microsoft are working on other things for phone that we'll talk about at a later date. But this Windows Cloud stuff, this is definitely a more laptop Chromebooky competitor rather than a phone thing, I think personally. But yeah, that's Windows Cloud in a nutshell. Kind of awesome, if you ask me. It's basically Windows RT, the second.
Yeah, RT was definitely interesting. Someone brought up how RT couldn't run Win32 apps. Technically not true. RT was able to run Office and it ran Explorer, which were Win32 apps. There were just restrictions on what that could do. There was also obviously there was no workaround for that. You couldn't allow people to download Win32 apps and run them, and it kind of got around that idea. But now with Project Centennial and getting these apps back into the store, this is definitely a way to help funnel Project Centennial, because it's going to go, all right, here's a new segment of devices, but they can only run store apps. Companies, you should really consider getting your app in the store so that education, can have it as well. And I think that's a kind of prodding Microsoft needs to do without throwing down this gauntlet saying you have to, the only way people are going to, could you imagine if they said you could only install apps through the store on Windows 10 for everybody, right? Everybody would go nuts. It would be an absolute disaster. So how do you allow the openness of Windows 10 with still prodding people, companies to get their, use Project Centennial? And I tell you, the Project Centennial stuff is really awesome. I'm such a huge fan of having those apps in the store. It's just way convenient when you go to set up a new device. It's also just easier to find things now. So I'm really hoping we see more of this. But I don't know. Centennial is still a project in motion. So.
Oh yeah, we should probably talk about as well in the insider builds this week. On the desktop, on the Home and Pro, the normal SKUs of Windows 10, there's now an option in settings that allows you to technically enable the same block that you can find on Windows Cloud. So it's off by default, nobody panic. It's not a thing Microsoft will be enforcing on users out of the box. It is an option that they're not even advertising. You have to know about it to be able to switch it on in the first place. You jump into settings, and there's 2 levels to it. There's 3 levels to it technically. There's off, which is the default level. Then there's an option for block apps unless there's one in the Windows Store. Which will essentially, if there's not an app in the Windows Store, it'll completely block it from running. And then there's also one that's block it, but allow me to install it if I really want to. So it's the same pop-up, but there's a button that says install anyway. So 2 levels to it, very nice. This will be good for devices that didn't ship with cloud or have already shipped and therefore cannot get cloud. Such as the HP Stream 7, which is a tablet, and I'm not running Win32 on that ever, really. And so I can enable this block, and it makes my device a little more secure, meaning rogue Win32 programs cannot run in the background or anything if I didn't know they were running in the first place and whatnot, because they cannot install, because this block is on if I turn it on, that is. So another nice sort of feature in the latest insider builds for normal editions of Windows.
Very good. And speaking of, let's go into mobile. So this week we had Mobile World Congress. We had nothing there for phone too much, of course, but there were quite a few tablet announcements, including HP with their Enterprise only Pro X2, which actually looks like an awesome device. I really just stress once again, it's Enterprise. For some reason, when we posted that article, we did a hands-on and we mentioned the pricing, people are like, who's going to buy that? It's just like, I don't know why, like, our audience sometimes is just so inept at being able to read like the fact that this, 'cause you have to understand, like, this device is more expensive because of all the security stuff. And HP is really pushing this ability for a secure platform with their own customized, they have a really unique BIOS setup that and they have chassis intrusion detection, which they're pushing a lot now. So if someone tries to pry open a device and takes the SSD. Now, to consumers, not a big deal. Although for some people who work in security and on their own private business, they do want those things. But all this stuff costs a lot of money. The military spec testing, all that drives up the cost of these devices. But the Pro X2, really cool. Looks like a basically a Surface type device, just a little bit more rugged. Has some really neat features, like you can pop out the SSD, which they advertise again for security. If you're sending your device in for servicing, you could pop out the SSD so that no one gets the information. That's like super cool, I think. But neat stuff. And somehow there was an Elite X3 under glass that was spotted. And what was neat about it was it's subtly different from the current Elite X3. So it has like a little bit more rounded curves to it. They moved the cameras around a bit. And just like it looks different, and it wasn't on, or maybe it was on, but there was no other information about it. HP was very cagey about it. Some people are like, "Oh, HP accidentally leaked this," or there's something accidental about this. Okay, HP is being very kind of quiet with this, but they totally knew what they were doing. Consider this a wink and a nod, saying, "Hey, we're still doing this with the Elite X3." I think, and there's good reason for that. We've seen a lot of companies come out with mobile devices and they release one, it doesn't do well, and then they wipe their hands of it. And I think HP is basically saying, we're sticking with this. We don't care. This isn't about the consumer market. This is a device we definitely see as playing a role. This wasn't a one-off thing. And here is something else we're working on. And now, there were some people saying, oh, maybe this is the consumer version, because there was this like rumor a while ago that they're going to do a consumer Elite X3. I don't believe that, and I have no firm information on this, but I still don't think the consumer market is there, and I think most of our audience would actually agree with that. You may want one, but this was not a smaller version of the Elite X3 as far as we know. It also doesn't make sense with the Continuum and the X3. The X3, conceptually as a name, means it's a PC, it runs as a laptop, and it does as a mobile phone. If you drop down the specs, I think you start to lose that whole pristine thing of what the X3 is supposed to represent, which is like the penultimate or actually ultimate expression of Windows 10 Mobile being this Continuum type device. So my speculation is you'll see this announced in the fall, right on the 1-year anniversary to Elite X3, the original one. It'll have probably a Snapdragon 835 processor, which should ring some bells for Windows 10 on ARM. Maybe it'll have that as well. And it'll come out with Redstone 3 with the composable shell and all these other changes, which we can talk about a little bit more in coming weeks. Which is the stuff you see when you've seen the evolution and continuum with windowed apps and all that. That's composable shell. That's what that's bringing. And if you think about that, that makes sense, right? HP comes out in the fall again, 1 year after the Elite X3. Here's the updated version, improved specifications. We changed the design a little bit, way more capable now. And Zach and I can both talk about this. When you see what they're doing with Continuum and try out the new stuff, it starts to click. You really, it's starting to come together. It's not 100% there, but it's still going forward as a project. And HP is definitely committed to this. And kudos to them, and especially sending the sign, saying, hey, they're sticking with this thing. So
it is pretty crazy what Seashell is capable of. If you own a HP laptop, when Seashell eventually arrives on Windows 10 Mobile, it essentially turns that laptop into an actual laptop just without the Win32 support. It is crazy how it just looks and feels like a normal Windows machine without Win32, and I'm honestly pretty excited for Redstone 3 to show up because of that. The unannounced Elite X3 itself, it does look a little bit different. It's got, by the looks of things, like a chrome bezel, which I personally think looks a lot nicer.
I agree.
It's slightly just the design is a little bit more sort of touched up. The B&O Chrome sort of speaker at the bottom is gone. However, that could just be an early design thing, which they are planning to add later. Since we don't know how far out they are from announcing this, loads of things could change on the device itself. And I do think it's interesting how they had it there and refused to say anything about it, and then sort of didn't have it there a few later.
Yeah. Although it's not too surprising, because if you think about the timeline of this, the Elite X3 was announced last year at Mobile World Congress. And of course, it didn't come out until September, October. That was a weird kind of rollout kind of thing. But think of the timeline. It's the exact same thing. Now, they didn't have a press conference over this or brief media on it, because I think it's probably still a little too early. And some of the things that it's going to be capable of doing and some of the feature set it's going to have not been announced by Microsoft. So they can't be like, it's going to do this cool thing in Continuum, and Microsoft's going to be like, hey, we didn't talk about that yet. So they got to pace this a little bit. So I think this was in lieu of doing a press briefing, because last year I was briefed before Mobile World Congress, and when that all came out, we had everything already done. This year they didn't do that, but I think this was like their way of going, hey, this thing is coming, we're still here, we're still doing it. And, I got to tell you, HP, of all the companies we're covering, HP, I think, is doing some really interesting stuff, both in the PC and mobile arena. I'm really impressed with the stuff that has been announced, stuff that's going to be announced pretty soon. And they're just, I don't know, they're reflective of Microsoft right now, this new company that's really pushing boundaries and doing cool things. And, I've said this over and over again. It's weird because a couple of years ago, I would never have used anything HP. And now Jez was, because we just had a meeting before this, Jez was like, I wonder if I should become an HP fanboy, jokingly, because some of the stuff they're coming out with is just, it's really nice. And that's the partner Microsoft needs. Not that Dell and Lenovo aren't doing interesting things either, but I don't know. HP's got this enterprise thing that I think really melds well with what Microsoft's trying to do.
I'd say definitely for Windows 10 Mobile, HP are the guys to be with if you're a Windows 10 Mobile fan this year. Microsoft have sort of stopped with the Windows 10 Mobile hardware. They've given up. HP is sort of carrying it on. They're continuing to support their Elite X3 with firmware updates and whatnot. They keep updating the FFUs in the device recovery tool, which is amazing. So you can reflash your phone via the recovery tool, and it should pick you up on the very latest production build with the new firmware as well. And
it's within 24 hours. It's crazy.
Sometimes it's even before it starts rolling out, if you're able to check and are on time with that. And I assume once Redstone 2 is out and eventually Redstone 3, HP will be updating their FFUs with that as well. So you never have to, unlike with the Lumia 950 and previous Lumas, when you reflash through the device recovery. On the 950, for example, it takes you back to 10586, and on a Lumia 930, it takes you back to Windows Phone 8.1, and you have to do the whole upgrade process again. But with the Elite X3, you don't have to do that, and I really do like that.
And part of that is because, and HP said this, that they're basically dealing with one ROM that they just upgrade for this. So whereas before the Lumias have very much regional, and Nokia was really bad at this. I don't know if it was bad or good. I mean, I understand what they were doing, but there were so many regional variants of the Lumias in terms of firmware and ROMs and if you guys remember that, I mean, we'd be like, Argentina today is getting an update for firmware, and it would be, okay, when's, it coming out for, Asia. But HP just has one that they update, and I think it's just a lot easier for them. But that's also, the reason why you can't turn off the shutter sound for the camera. It makes a click noise because in Japan that's required by law. And so they're not going to make a special ROM for Japan or a special ROM for the rest of the world. So you get a clicking sound, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'd much rather the one unified ROM that just allows everybody to get the update at the same time, rather than waiting weeks for Argentina, then America, then the UK, then Spain, like the old Nokia days. God, that was a nightmare, if I'm remembering it.
It really was. Someone's asking, Win10 fan again, is Elite X3 made by HP Inc. or HP Enterprise? I believe it's HP Inc. Enterprise, I believe, is still different. I believe that's the software. I think I'm getting that right. But it's the same branch that makes the laptops and everything like that. So.
Yeah, but funny enough, for support, for phone support, you have to go through the HP Business support lines, which confused me at first, because I went through the consumer lines. I was like, what's an Elite X3? I don't know.
Two things about the Elite X3. It's not a consumer device, so you have to go through the business lines. It's also not a phone, technically.
It's a tablet. It's categorized as a tablet on HP support,
device,
which is also confusing.
Yes.
Very much so. Shall we move on to the mixed reality stuff?
Oh, sure.
Microsoft sort of announced some mixed reality news this week, but the biggest news of that was that mixed reality is coming to the Xbox One and Project Scorpio sometime in 2018. Now, they didn't really reveal much about what this means or anything, but what stood out to me was the fact that Microsoft originally, with the Project Scorpio launch, said VR and or mixed reality and whatnot would be coming to Project Scorpio in 2017, which made us assume it would be a launch thing along with Project Scorpio. Now they switched that to 2018. Turns out it won't be a launch thing; it'll be coming next year instead. I guess that's good. I mean, I'm not super convinced about on VR gaming on consoles. I mean, it's obviously a thing on PC and whatnot, and people love it there. But the PlayStation 4 has PSVR already, and I don't think it's doing all that well. I don't think many people care.
It's doing okay. And if you think about now, I'm just speculating here. Phil Spencer's talked about VR before in consoles, but he said like he sees. I believe I'm quoting him on this. If not, apologize, but that the VR world and consoles and mixed reality, everything, he sees it more as a wireless thing to use, which makes sense. The setup right now for PSVR is pretty crazy with the amount of wires. This is still a big limitation. I don't have any VR yet. I'm going to probably pick up the HTC Vive or Vive, whatever it's called, at some point, because with laptops it's becoming more of a thing people want to know about. But normally I would just go and buy and be like, yeah, new thing. I just kind of don't care about VR. Now, interestingly, Microsoft renamed the holographic platform, I guess, to Windows Mixed Reality. There's all sorts of names here. There's mixed reality, there's augmented reality, there's holographic, there's virtual reality. Mixed reality kind of encompasses all of that. So if you're wondering what the actual difference is, mixed reality can be holographic, it can be virtual, it can also be augmented. But these are all very, mixed realities, obviously when you can see the world around you, but you're putting sort of virtual reality elements into it. Virtual reality, of course, is completely, it's just immersive. The whole world is recreated for you. Augmented reality is when you see something like, you test the furniture in your real world kind of thing when you're browsing through a store. That was demoed before. So, or it adds elements to your existing world. So when you're walking around, you see data points or something like that. So that's augmented. It's very fine distinction, but I think mixed reality is supposed to encompass all of that. I think mixed reality for gaming is definitely more interesting because it reminds me of that game that's on HoloLens right now where I always forget the name of it, but where the things pop out of the wall. That's actually one of the best games out there, and that's a ton of fun to play. And there's also that other one, the little character that runs around. I forgot the names of these things, but mixed reality is kind of cool. So yeah, Project Scorpio, we're still expecting that to launch in October, probably late October. It'll have Redstone 3 and everything, and it's going to be a real interesting device, I think.
Redstone 3 is looking to be quite a big update for a lot of things.
Yeah, especially because now we're talking about it along with, what is the next Xbox, basically.
We're expecting a lot of new hardware to launch with Redstone 3 or around Redstone 3.
Right.
So, I don't know what that could mean. With Windows 10 Mobile, it obviously means C-Shell and the adaptable shells and whatnot. For Xbox, I guess there's a lot of software optimization they need to make to Scorpio with Redstone 3 for it to be able to do 4K on games and whatnot and whatever other new features.
Going back to the augmented and mixed reality thing and Scorpio in 2018, and then, the comments about it being wireless. If you go back to the Project Forletia, am I pronouncing that right? It was this document leaked, I think in 2013 or 2012, and it showed us glasses you would wear in your living room, and it was for gaming and all this kind of stuff. I'm wondering if that's still a thing for them. When they announced HoloLens, I think some of us were like, oh, that's what that is. But I'm not convinced. When I talked to some people about it, I'm not sure it really was. So, they can do virtual reality, mixed reality probably at any time with these devices, but I think they know that it's evolving, that they're not missing it yet. And I think they still want to do it right. I think I don't know, maybe they do like a wireless setup of mixed reality. I mean, that's what they're waiting on, and that's why it won't be ready to 2018. This is speculation on my part, but if you look at some of the history there, that could be what they're trying to aim for, which would make, I think, a bigger impact than this, four-corded braided wire thing you have to, attach and shut out the world, that like the PlayStation VR is like. So
I mean, one of the magical sort of points of HoloLens is that it is wireless entirely. It's not tethered to anything, which is what you would assume it would be when it was first announced. I was expecting this to be a thing that you have to plug into a PC, just like the Oculus Rift. I think the Oculus Rift needs to be plugged in, and the HTC Vive, which the HTC Vive more so. But with the HoloLens, no, it's completely self-contained. There's an on switch and it's on your head. It doesn't last forever. I think the battery is like an hour, maybe 2 hours. But then again, you wouldn't be using a HoloLens for more than 2 hours anyway. It's not really a device designed for that, at least not yet. And maybe in the future with updates and whatnot, but it's still more of a sort of demo unit sort of for developers and stuff.
I mean, think about what would be cool. I mean, again, virtual reality, it's already here. You can go buy it if you want. And Microsoft is not competing against it, right? If anything, they're embracing it. It can work with Windows 10. If you go to the Microsoft stores, you can try the HTC Vive. So they're not like, oh, these guys are the enemy, we got to destroy them. They're like, no, that can coexist with our Windows 10 world, and we'll make it work with it. So why would they, even with Scorpio, like why would they try to recreate like the Vive experience? But wouldn't it be cooler if you were playing Halo, and I'm going to use Halo because that's Zach's favorite game, and you put on like goggles, that you could just see through and still see your screen that you're playing, but you had information coming from the game as an augmented reality experience overlaying the world you're seeing. To me, that's way cooler. Like that now is like this cool hybrid thing. It's not as intensive and immersive as a virtual reality, but at the same time, it gives you a unique, different experience. You can presumably do like a lot cooler things, right? You can actually see information about your weapons, maybe projected in the world and stuff like that, or expand the screen so you can see elements around you that aren't on the actual TV that you're looking at. So I'm really curious if that's what they're going to be pushing for, which to me would be way cooler than just doing like, oh, we're just going to have tethered virtual reality glasses because, it's what everybody's doing.
I like the idea of Microsoft enhancing your gaming experience rather than replacing the gaming experience. With VR, it entirely replaces it and puts you in an entirely new world. But with AR and whatnot, you can more enhance the current familiar gaming experiences. As me and Dan have said before, VR is very sort of antisocial. If you're sitting in a room with other people and you put a VR headset on, you've kind of just shut everybody out and you're kind of more susceptible to danger and whatnot. But with an augmented kit, you'd still be in the world you're familiar with, but with an enhanced gaming experience. It'd be the same experience on a TV screen. But then, for example, you could have, say, as Dan said, your HUD actually around your peripheral vision that's being displayed holographically or something, so you can see all your guns and whatnot, your health bar. But then also you can also have small elements within the game itself show up outside of the screen as well. So for example, maybe a waypoint or enemy sort of heat maps and whatnot that is just sort of spread out across the room, so you can, when you turn the camera on the screen, you can see where all that is and stuff. That's a very good example of how Microsoft could be different when it comes to their virtual reality-ness of gaming and whatnot. And I would much rather see that show up on Scorpio rather than a full-on VR. I mean, sure, have the VR experience there as well, but make the selling stuff, the selling point
be too, with that AR experience is, I don't think you'd require the game to have it, right? It gives the option to the developer to have it as like a selling point. But like that's kind of the problem I think with virtual reality games. It's like it's VR or nothing, right? Like I don't think you can play VR games without the virtual reality setup. So it's like you basically have to be like, this is a VR only game and you need this extra hardware to play it. Whereas if like this was like an augmented thing with Halo, it could be optional, right? You can like just play the game normally or get this augmented, more immersive experience with the AR part of the game. And that would still allow developers to both hit the wider general market as well as like the pro and niche kind of gamer who wants that larger experience. So Microsoft, if you're not doing that, that idea is free. You can take it, run with it. But my hunch is that they already know this and that's what they're working on. So that may be the reason why this won't come until 2018, in which case I'm still totally fine with it. But yeah, we'll just wait and see.
There's a lot going on right now. I'm very excited for the next couple of years when it comes to
Nadella's book coming out in the fall, which we can read about.
Yeah, I don't read. What are you talking about? I'm going to download.
I'm actually really interested about that book. I don't know. His
What's it about?
It's about the cultural change at Microsoft, and there was a good interview. Well, actually, I posted it in the group me at USA Today. Where he's talking about, he's been an insider with Microsoft for a very long time. Like he didn't come as CEO from like this outside, experience as someone who was new to Microsoft, and one had to learn the culture, and then two decided to change it. He was, as he described himself, the quintessential insider. He's been with the company for like 20 years. I think he was hired when he was 24. He's only 49 now, which is kind of weird because he seems pretty young for managing that amount of money. I don't know, it blows my mind to be a CEO. It's just like the responsibilities. But he's saying that he found himself as, this quintessential insider, but here he is. He decided that like the culture really needed to change. And everybody's seen this. The jokes, of course, of Microsoft years ago were, yeah, they were competitive internally. So that there's that famous graphic of all the guns from all the departments pointed at each other. And instead of competing with the outside world and the Googles and the Amazons and Apple, they were too busy infighting, trying to vie for the dollars and getting the attention of the upper executives. Now that's shifted, right? So that's why Microsoft employees today, despite the cynicism of our own audience, are very excited about what the company is doing, and they're very much enjoying working there because there's this new, idea of like we have a shared vision that we're all working towards, and that's something that Nadella has helped really push and usher in. And I think that's what that's why the book's called. I think it's called Hit Refresh. It's about restarting the company over with this new, in that USA Today article, he also talks about how, they're buying up companies, these smaller companies out of the valley and stuff. But instead of just buying them up and then getting rid of the leadership team, they're inviting the leadership team to these retreats, and they're like going, tell us what you know, tell us what you learned, tell us what you think works. And then they're taking those things and trying to, put it into Microsoft. So, in the past, they would just swallow these companies, I think. And, we've seen, previous examples of this where they buy things and they don't do very well with it. So, yeah, I don't know. That's why there's such a big shift, I think, going on in Microsoft right now, and it's definitely interesting.
That's so weird. The whole infighting thing that Microsoft used to do, and now they no longer do it. There's the kind of opposite of what Apple have gone through. Once, when Steve Jobs was in charge of Microsoft, there was that competitive edge within.
You said Steve Jobs at Microsoft?
No, sorry, Apple. I was talking about Apple. When Steve Jobs at Apple, when he was obviously in charge and live. All the teams within Apple will always put against each other. They would always be fighting for the best product. That was the same with the iPhone or the iPod, I believe. There was two different the iPod team had an idea for the iPhone, and obviously the other team had an idea for the iPhone as well.
But he was the head guy with the ideas. So how Apple worked was he was the visionary. So he came up with the idea, and that's why it was sort of like with the iPhone, it's like it's got to have one button. That was his thing. And then he would tell the teams, go make that. And then they would bring it to him and he'd be like, nope, not good enough. And so that's how Apple operated. He was the guy that calling all the shots and saying, this is how it needs to be. And then he directed his teams to go make that happen no matter what. I think that was very different from Microsoft, which had no vision. That was the problem with mobile, which they ignored mobile, and it was like a side project. They were kept out of Windows 8 development, and there was just a lot of mismanagement going on. And there was, and Dell mentions this too, that they had this goal during the 90s and 2000s, get a PC in every home. And they kind of did achieve that. But then there was nothing else after that. It was like, okay, so now what? Now we're finding out the PC if you said that right now, 2017, it'd be like, okay, why would that be a goal? Everything is mobile these days, and, different wearables and augmented reality and stuff. And so there's also this thing where, he's so supportive of the HoloLens team, who I guess were almost fearful that they were going to get chopped, because of their budgets and stuff like that. And it's not like HoloLens; it's not a consumer device, and they've only sold tens of thousands or a couple of thousand of these things. And the old Microsoft would have been like, okay, that didn't work out, and we're not really, this is going to be too long, cut it, But instead, he doubled down on it, and his thing is like, you got to give your team's cover to learn from mistakes and, improve upon things if you really believe in it. So they really believe in holographic and HoloLens and mixed reality and all that stuff. So no matter that's why it doesn't matter if they push back version 2 for version 3. they're committed to it 100%. And, it's the same thing with mobile in general. They are, make jokes like, oh, mobile and cloud first, so much for mobile. Actually, I would say everything Microsoft is doing right now with Windows 10 is for mobile. I've been saying this for years. Like, they're trying to get Windows 10 as it exists and, coming from Windows 8 off the desktop. I mean, it's there now as a desktop thing for companies and people who need it. But the whole point of like composable shell, Project Andromeda, and everything that they're doing is to take it for this future where there is no desktop anymore. And I don't know how much more I can explain that with people. It's mixed reality, holographic, tablets, mobile devices, IoT, all this. It's for a future where there is no desktop PC. So that is mobile for them. I know people's vision right now is just mobile phones. I get that. That is where we're at. Although I've said before, in 2014, mobile phones have peaked. We're now in this plateau period. This is why people are getting bored. New Samsung S8, it's only got 3 gigs or 4 gigs of RAM. And people are just like rolling their eyes now because they're iterative updates. It's plateaued. It's good. It's a mature technology. It's a mature platform. What comes next, and that's what Microsoft is trying to do right now. So.
I live for the day in which smartphones are just these little chips that you stick in your temple, and it just programs itself into your eyeball, and that's it.
Have you watched Black Mirror at all? Yeah. So for our audience, if you don't know, go on Netflix if you have it. Go watch Black Mirror season 1, 2, and 3. Although I would say season 1 was okay, but definitely season 3 I think was amazing. That was the latest one. But look, what makes that show so compelling and interesting is the stories they tell. Of course, are really fun, but it's the technology that is in there / the social integration, how it all works. When you watch these shows, you're like, oh, I could totally see that being a thing. It's just like, someone just got to make it happen. And when you watch that show and see what Microsoft is doing, like you kind of get like that's the future that they're building for. And it's always fun to see shows like that because it's like, yeah, I could totally see that, kind of happening. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, a lot of things are happening right now for Windows. Windows, the moving away from the desktop thing, that's a big deal for Windows because Windows for decades was built on the desktop foundation. It was a heavy operating system. It was clunky.
Right. And you needed CPU and GPU upgrades to run the latest version of Windows. I'll never forget that with Vista. If you need to run Arrow, you need this kind of processor. It was ridiculous.
For the longest time, it was such a big and horrible and clunky operating system. And then with sort of the iPhone sort of surprised Microsoft, and they were still at the time riding high on their desktop. Desktop's the best. Desktop's not going anywhere. But then the iPhone came along and sort of changed everything over 2007, 2008, 2009. It became clear slowly but surely that mobile was the future, and Microsoft was stuck in 2009 with Windows 7 and this operating system that wasn't designed to run on mobile devices. It wasn't great on battery life on laptops at the time. Touch support for Windows 7 was terrible. It just wasn't there. And then with Windows 8, they sort of panicked. Went, all right, tell you what, Windows 7, let's forget about desktop. Let's make a tablet OS, a mobile OS. And then obviously that alienated the people who were still on desktop, which was still basically everybody. At the time, desktops were still definitely there along with mobiles. But now we're at that period in which more and more people are buying an iPad, or not an iPad, but like a tablet rather than a desktop, because they don't need a desktop anymore. A lot of people used to use their desktops for browsing the web, email, and listening to music. You can do all of that on a phone or a tablet now, and so not everybody needs a desktop no more. I know there are still people out there who do. Me and Dan, for example, video editors, gamers, artists, animators. They all still need powerful desktops, of course, but for the majority of people, you can do everything on a tablet or a phone or a laptop these days. So Microsoft needed to switch.
Nowadays, and this will go right into my Razer discussion. Although before I want to plug also The Expanse is another really good show that you should all watch. Season 2 is halfway done right now. If you're really into technology, The Expanse is really good because it's a sci-fi show. Happens obviously in the future. But it's also been, people really enjoy it because the technology in there is pretty much based on reality. Like they don't really screw with physics too much in there, whether it comes to the ships that are being used and how things operate and anti-gravity versus, and we see the computers they use and all that. It's again, like trying to take existing technologies and where they are, like where they will be in the future. And it's a very realistic show in that sense. So I highly recommend both of those. But speaking of like having computers and all this kind of stuff, like, so I guess this goes into my Razer Blade discussion, where Razer Blades and Razer are famous because of the Razer Core, which is the external GPU system, which is sort of this world where you can actually now have a pretty sick computer setup and then just unplug in and have a laptop that you take with you. Still niche. There's still some issues with it, I think, but that's an example of how, like, ideally I could have that as my setup. And I've thought about it, this idea of like using the Razer Blade as my main computer, having an eGPU connect up to 2 or 3 displays. And I do my work there during the day, but then I can just unplug this thing and take it with me to the coffee shop, and I don't lose any data whatsoever. Everything is still there, and that's a pretty impressive thing. And now I'll talk about the Razer Blade real quick. So Razer Blade is like one of my favorite laptops. It's a gaming one, 14-inch. So it came out. I feel bad here. There was a late 2016 version, which only came out, I think, in the fall. That's for the GTX 1060, but it had the Skylake CPU in it. They were waiting on, of course, and I know why they did this, right? So the GTX 1060 was done. So they put it in with Skylake, sold it. They hit the holiday season, sold a bunch of them, and now they come out with the new Kaby Lake processor, and they just refreshed it. They also improved the RAM is faster. That's kind of it, actually. Those are the two big things, but I have both. I jokingly said I was going to buy the Kaby Lake one, but then I decided we needed Jez to actually get a real gaming laptop because he keeps trying to game on the Surface Book. And, dual core, quad core, big difference when it comes to hardcore gaming. You need a quad core. So I'm giving Jez my quote unquote old Razer Blade. And so I had a chance. I got both of them. So I've been benchmarking them all week. Kaby Lake is actually significantly better. And part of that is because it's just clocked higher. It's 3.2 gigahertz for turbo versus I think 3.6 gigahertz for the new turbo. It also has a baseline clock that's higher. And that with the faster RAM, I benchmarked these things. And it's going to vary on game to game. The GPUs are the exact same, but on Gears of War 4, I could play at ultra and hit 70 frames per second, where that would get me about 50 frames per second, the old one. Like, that's 20 frames. That's not a small improvement. That's actually pretty huge. And it varies on, Rise of the Tomb Raider is only about 5 to 8 frames difference, so not as big, of course, but really nice. It actually runs cooler, and the other thing is now the fans turn off when it's idle, which is really cool, because that was a complaint a lot of people had was the Razer Blade, if you're just using Windows 10 and browsing the web, all that, the fans were always kind of spinning and it bothered people. It didn't bother me too much. I was like, this is a gaming laptop that's kind of crazy, like in a thin metal chassis, so I accepted it, but with the new Kaby Lake version, the fans just turn off and it's completely silent. So peace of mind there. But really nice update. I'll have the full review up on Monday. So by the time this podcast goes up, you'll see. I'm really proud of this one. I did really crazy benchmarks on it. I also compared thermal images between the two after 20 minutes of gaming. You can actually visibly see the temperature difference. It runs about 10 degrees cooler, the new version. Really impressive stuff that's out there. I also reviewed, if you haven't seen, the Lenovo Idea Center Y710 Cube, which is a really cool looking computer. It looks like a cube. It has a handle on it that actually looks really nice. I just love the design of this. You can configure it up to a GTX 1080, but just a really nice, compact 20-pound computer that you can move around your house if you really want to. You could also do VR and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. These computers are just kind of neat. I like to see this sort of renaissance we're going through with the PC stuff. And this is what we joke about. I'm actually kind of glad the mobile stuff has faded because now I don't have to worry about phones as much. I'm jumping into PCs, and it's a good time to get back into PCs. There's a lot of cool stuff going on right now. So.
Before we sign off, there's a few people in the comments asking about Andromeda, which Dan briefly mentioned earlier. So we don't actually know much about Andromeda. It's a very sort of secrety, shush project internally. What I do know, a few people are talking about how Andromeda is the new Continuum experience coming with Seashell. That's not technically true. The Continuum experience is Seashell. It's not Andromeda. Andromeda, from what I've heard, and I've heard very little, is that it's a extremely lightweight quotes version of Windows. It's not clear what this is for or what it will run on or anything. It's in very early development right now, so it could evolve and change into something much bigger. But from what I've seen and heard and people I've spoken to, it's just an extremely lightweight version of Windows that has no Win32. I think it has the UWP platform, which would make sense. But even at this point in development, I don't think it even has a finished UI. It's completely bare bones. And I've also heard that there is a hardware element to it. So there's an Andromeda code name for a device internally. I don't know if that's a device that will ever show up for consumers or if it's just a test bench internally. I have no idea. But I wouldn't say Andromeda is the new Continuum mode for Windows 10 Mobile. That's not accurate. If I find out any concrete or any more details on Andromeda, I will obviously talk about it when I can. But that's basically all I know right now. I don't think Dan knows anything either.
No. I'm just curious and speculating here that maybe it's for lightweight computing environments, commercial rollouts, things like point of purchase computers, right. Kiosk type situations where, why spec out a computer with SSD and, an Intel Core processor and all this where you can run on a very light machine, still get that Windows Server experience. Obviously, no Win32 subsystem, make it very light, and also no security vulnerabilities, but you can still install secure store apps. Again, I think that kind of makes sense for commercial enterprise sort of situation. That's so sure for consumers, although that gets into the whole mobile device thing, which we still don't know what the exact plan is there for mobile. They seem to have quite a few options. We just know everything is sort of coming together. There's going to be a lot more things available. For instance, Windows 10 on ARM. You mix that with composable shell in the future. Maybe you can have a super powerful mobile phone device that then can do Continuum and run Win32. That could be for the high end, kind of dream device. Then there might be this, lighter version that runs just store apps and doesn't do Continuum or doesn't do Win32, which would make sense for regular consumers who don't necessarily want that power either. So I don't know. They seem to be experimenting, but like I said, everything they're doing seems to be this concept of how light can we make Windows 10 and how much hardware can we stick this thing on, which I think is, it's a big project, but it's really interesting stuff.
I'd love it if Andromeda turned out being Windows 10 Mobile, but without the phone stuff. So it was a very light, literally, like I said, an extremely lightweight version of Windows with no Win32 anything. It's an entirely universal Windows app platform. In the sense, it still runs C Shell, so it looks the same and whatnot, and it can do all the adaptability things, but it's only for the universal apps, and it cannot run Win32, not through a software block like on Windows Cloud, right, but just physically cannot run it because it doesn't have the code for it. That would be awesome in my mind.
You know what we need that for is smart TVs,
right?
Smart refrigerators, these kind of things. Could you imagine? I mean, if you think about it, like Samsung, don't they run Tizen? I forgot what they're running now. There's also the WebOS that's in smart TVs. Like, why not a Windows 10 version for that? Can you imagine just having like a light Windows 10 on your TV? Like, I don't know. That's kind of a cool thing. I can see, I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities to put Windows 10 kind of everywhere.
I think we might hear more about Andromeda at Build. I'm not sure if they'll refer to it as Andromeda since that's an internal code name, but we might hear more about it. And if we do, I'm sure me or Dan will be, hey, they're talking about Andromeda right now. I know they haven't said the word, but that's definitely Andromeda because, Microsoft like to not use their internal code names publicly. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today's show.
Sounds good. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow me at Daniel_Rubino. That's RUBINO, Daniel_Rubino. And Zach is Zach Bowden, ZACBOWDEN. You can try to ask us questions. I'll be doing another Ask Dan probably in the next week or so. So everybody's getting back from Mobile World Congress this week, so our teams are a little split up. Things you can look forward to, of course, will be that Razor Blade showdown between Kaby Lake and Skylake. I'll also be doing some XPS 15 versus the Spectre X360 15. I know a lot of people are still wanting to see differences between those and my thoughts on comparing those. We'll be doing a couple of videos as well as articles on that stuff. I still got some keyboards to round up. I got my Razer keyboards I got to take a look at, as well as some ergonomic ones and a couple other things. So up to my neck and hardware, which I guess is a good problem to have. Zach, what can we expect from you for next week?
Next week I have a few things. I have a sort of review of the lowest end Surface Book you can buy, so the Intel Core i5 one without the dedicated GPU. I was an idiot and bought that one when the Surface Book hit the UK, and I've regretted it ever since. I'm going to write up my experience on that. I've got a few other things coming that I can't remember off the top of my head, but stay tuned to my Twitter and the site for the articles when they go live.
Hopefully I'll also have a review of this Chewy, CHUWI 14-inch laptop, which costs less than $300. Definitely low end, but probably the best low end PC I've ever seen. It's a 14-inch with an IPS display, which that's actually a really good display to have in a $300 device. So really interesting laptop. Hopefully, I'll get a video out on that as well. So busy.
I just remembered another thing I am working on. It probably won't be next week. It'll be soon though. I'm looking at getting. I don't know if you've ever played with one, Dan. The Vio Phone Biz Windows Phone.
No, that's one phone I never did get. I thought about it, but
I might be getting one in very soon. And if I do, I'll be doing a review on that. It's like a mid-range sort of Japanese Windows phone that never really was ever spoken about. So it'll be interesting to see.
I think if I got it here, I would only be able to run it like on 2G networks or something like that. So I never got it.
I mean, I'm just curious to see how it runs because I haven't used Windows 10 Mobile on a Snapdragon 617 before, which is what the phone runs. It has Continuum support, which is interesting as well. So I guess that's the lowest end chip that supports Continuum. So it'll be interesting to see how that device runs. Apparently, it's a lovely device. It's all like metal and stuff. I'm going to see if I can get one in, and if I can, I'll definitely do a review soon.
Sounds good. Remember, this broadcast is on Fridays, usually at 2:30 p.m., although we did 3 p.m. If you want to join in on Beam and YouTube, we'll be doing questions now. Of course, that won't be for the actual recording part, but you can join in for that. Also, we missed it this Thursday, but next Thursday we'll be doing another Microsoft Gaming and Libations where we'll all just chill out, me, Zach, and Jez, play some Xbox games as well as chat with you guys and also give away codes for free games. So make sure you join us for that. Otherwise, head to Windows Central and see what we're up to. Thanks for watching and listening in. Take care, everybody.
What's my worst features? 3D Paint. I mean, who cares, right?
I'm a hardcore regular Paint user.
Paint.exe for the win. You know, for a little while they got rid of Paint.exe in the build.
I know that crushed me. No,
it's back now.
That.
If you type Paint in, it comes up still.
I use Paint like 9,000 times a day.